Eaton Square is a residential square of the Victorian Edwardian period, situated in Monkstown, South County Dublin. The houses were built from the late 1860s to the early 1900s. 100 years ago, the square appeared much as it looks today. Eaton Square seems always to have had an interesting mix of householders: poets, artists, professionals and their children. One house, number 13, at the early part of the century was the Presbyterian manse for the church's clergy of the area. This short video, supported by the residents of the square and the Millennium Commission, represents a moment in time, the 3rd of September in the year 2000. It seeks to present some thoughts and aspirations of those residents who wish to take part and preserve them for viewing for generations to come.
My name is Derek Young. This is my wife Anne. We've been living in 15 Eaton Square for the last 32 years.
This is number 4, Eaton Square, and we are the Hudson Taylor family. And
I'm Hudson and she's?
Taylor. And we've lived here for 4 years. And Holly was actually born in this house.
I'm Padraig O'Dea. This is my wife Eileen, who's originally from Canada, Toronto in Canada. We're just moving into Eaton Square right now, and we came over from England on the boat this morning at 5 o'clock.
We have the McKiernan family. My name is Declan, my wife is Veronica, this is Maeve, Breed, and this is Sean. We live in number 3.
Hello there, my name is Sue Elliott and I live at number 19 Eaton Square. I've lived here for 34 years.
I'm Jessica Fuller and I live at number 6 Eaton Square. I've been here since 1996. I live with my boyfriend, fiance, if we ever get married, partner, lover.
We're the Powers. This is my wife Aisling. This is Harry. This is the newcomer Dara. I'm Stephen.
My name is Sheila O'Connor and my husband Tom. We've lived here for 27 years. Probably our only claim to fame would be the fact that my dad has lived with us for 26 years and he's probably the oldest resident at 90.
Well, this is part of the O'Donovan family and we live in number 13. Our eldest two aren't here at the moment. Alan was born here in the square. We moved in 1982 and he arrived a few months later. So that's the length of time we're living here.
I'm Joe Reid. I live in number 11 Eaton Square. I live on the top apartment.
My name is Bronya and this is my Natasha Katrina and we're living at 6 Rear Eaton Square and we've been living here nearly, well, a good year and a half anyway.
Although structurally unaltered for a century, the residents reflect upon some of the other changes.
When we bought the house it was in 1989, and at that time the house was in 13 units. Every room was a flat, there was a toilet and bed sits throughout the place. So it was in quite poor order. A lot of the houses on the square were like that. A lot of people had viewed the houses being too big for family homes and they had bought them and put them into flats for maybe 10 or 20 years. But over the last 10 years or 15 years, people have started moving back into the square. And it's now mainly family. There are a couple of apartments and a couple of houses and flats, but the balance now is basically towards families.
It's true to say that there has been quite a significant shift in the age profile, but also the character of the personality of the square, in that when we arrived first, our children, we were really one of the few families with young children. There were other neighbours who could remember back, say, to the early part of the century, and these were the Leemings, now up in number 3, 4, is it?
Yeah. 3,
but 2 sisters who would remember back, as I say, to the time when they would play tennis in the square and remember the crinoline dresses, strawberry breakfasts.
And
so it was a grand
time.
time.
Yeah, that's true.
Some parts of it have changed, really, you know. Along the other side of it, I think, you know, the fronts of the houses and that have changed a lot. Naturally, the residents, most of them are gone who were here when I came here to live first. I think there are only 2 people in this square who are here longer than me.
Well, I don't think I'll be an 8-year-old in Eaton Square because, again, I won't be able to afford the house probably. But I'd say that
The square mightn't have changed that much, like within itself, but maybe the people around it and the things they do might have changed, like the jobs and stuff like that. I'm sure there'll be loads of new jobs that we haven't even thought of yet and stuff like that. But I'd say the actual square would kind of stay the same, the park and things like that, hopefully.
When our children were small, it was all much more casual and relaxed. They ran across through the gaps in the railings and they had all their pals, and we had a bonfire every Halloween, a huge bonfire in the middle of the square. There was no residence association, it was more casual. I suppose it was a bit more overgrown, but I liked it.
The square itself is much better looked after. It used to be a bit of a shambles, and over the years it's been tended more and more, so it's kind of much more accessible nowadays.
When we arrived here in early in '85, we decided that the square needed some upgrading at that stage. It was in a fair state of disrepair, and we got to work on it, probably a little bit too enthusiastically at the time. And we did some cutting, and since then we were referred to as Rambo Riley. However, we got the job done, and I think it shows the benefit of it now. Well, I think at that time, which was around about '86 or so, we did a huge amount of work in repairing the railings and getting it back into order. And since then, it's been maintained regularly, and that's the important thing. Regular maintenance, and there's no major work to be done. But it's just basically keeping the ambience of it right, and I think as long as nothing major is done now to it, I think it'll be a fine state for many years to come.
The standard of schools in the area seems always to have been, and still is, an attractive reason for young families to live in Eaton Square.
Holly, when she grows up, will go to School Lookham across the square. I'm very happy with the schools. I think they're great.
The best school to go to is actually the closest school and the one on your doorstep. And we sent the children to Scolarcon and have been very, very happy with it. And I think one of the most important things is that it's given them a sense of their heritage and a sense of language purely for language's sake, because it probably will not have any great use to them in their future careers or in their future lives, but they will always have a fluency in Irish that they wouldn't have had if they lived perhaps in any other area.
Is mis méid ní hiarnán, tá mé gáag líana díis, cóníam é trí cearnó Eaton. Is é seo scolarchan agus is scoil lán Gaelgacha é. Dog mé an scoil seo é mí lúnasá an bhíon seo. Tá ceircéid fihimí poiste sa scoil seo agus is scoil lán Gaelgacha é, agus tá chuan cad Gaelga leart an níl cad éon béarla leart. Laíonn na postí Gaelga an tá a fáin siad isteach ag dechan aní go dtí cethú tar éis déanaar tagann siad amach. Is scoilíontacht é agus tá na ceachta go léir in Gaelga a chuan an ceacht béarla.
I think there's such a pride though in our heritage, which is a newfound thing because we're now not embarrassed about our heritage, that I think it probably will survive, and I think people will work at keeping it alive.
I think as Europe becomes more and more the same, all the same, that the differences will become more important. Not in a nationalistic way like it used to be, but in a more poetic way.
Some residents have searched their deeds and their memories to give us a glimpse of Eaton Square past.
There was at some stage a rugby club right here. I think there were sports fields before the houses were built. Our own particular house, I don't know too much about Weir history because we're here 34 years, but before that there was a family called Kilpatrick here.
The original lease was dated the 24th of June 1901 from Maurice Dockrell to Samuel Waldron. It was passed on from Waldron to Henry Macaulay in 1902, and then from him to George Harris in 1926 after 24 years. From him to Herbert Fitzgerald in 1929, then to Gladys Russell in 1933, and from her to Joseph Lawler in 1956. And we bought the house in 1968, and we've been living here since then.
We just have a snapshot of the history of the house, if you'd be interested in that. It was built in 1900, and the original deed that I have here is it was sold on the 24th of June 1901 for £700, which is less than €900 which I presume in time to come will buy a pint, if you're lucky, you know.
The original guy that owned the house died intestate, leaving
right.
a total estate of £4,400. And then the house was sold to the Methodists, and it became a presbytery in 1923, and it was sold for £826, 7 and 10 pence.
And the Methodists, the deeds are interesting there because it was a whole load of trustees had it. And everything that happened, pages of these trustees would sign the deeds. This is what happened when the Methodists made any move. Pages of them had to sign everything. It was the Methodist house until 1967. And then it was sold to a Paul M. Corn for £5,200. In 1972, it was sold to Thomas Alexander Hamilton and June Blackburn Hamilton for £10,500. In 1975, they sold it to Bruce and Jan Carter for £16,000. And we arrived in 1982 for £71,000. And when we go, we hope that this inflation will continue.
The atmosphere of safety and non-intrusive neighbourliness is an appealing quality to Eaton Square residents.
I'm pretty friendly with most of the children in the square. I get a kick out of them, you know. Their honesty appeals to me. Children, their honesty. I'll tell you the honesty of one little boy here now in the square. If I gave one of them, say, a thing of Smarties, I'd have a queue up the steps, the rest of them, you know. But this little fellow, he's Andy's son, actually, one of his sons. He, one day there, he was weeping. Somebody had crushed his little car. So I gave him a bar. And I said to him, now, Harry, I said, that's our secret, you know. So, because I didn't want to queue. And a couple of days after I met him, and I said to him, well, Harry, did you keep our secret? And he looked at me and he said, no, I ate it.
You feel that the kids are safe. I mean, maybe it's an illusion, but you actually feel that they're safe, and so it makes life a lot easier. You don't worry about them when the doors open and they're out. I think society's changing for the worse, and this perhaps still preserves some old family values, which is one of the things I really like about the area. I actually fear for the way society develops in the long term. I don't want to have gates at the end of the road and security cameras, because that's an end to true freedom. I think we've got the last of true freedom here. True freedom is being allowed to go and wander where you like at all times in safety, and we still feel we have that here. And for how long it lasts, I don't know.
There's a community here. In most places in Dublin, it's just somewhere to live, but here everyone knows each other, and especially because the park helps, because every kid goes into the park and everyone knows each other.
Growing up Square is brilliant because there was loads of kids about the place. We just play games all the time in the park and everything. It was great. Really nice place to live.
Well, so far, I mean, it's been very sociable. I mean, before this, we lived in central London and then New York for a year and a half, and I mean, that was always in apartments where supposedly you're near your neighbours, but I mean, we've never spoken to our neighbours for like 8 years. It's much more sociable here. It's nice having the square, which brings people together in a more of a communal area.
For us, coming from the countryside almost, here it was a bit daunting because people were very close. We were kind of wondering, almost living in your pocket. But it hasn't worked like that. People do give you your space.
But what of the future? In 100 years' time, will the square still exist? Will global warming have caused a rise in sea level, making the square a desirable beachfront property?
There's going to be so many changes. I think people will be a lot more isolated. Today we got about 50, 60 people out in the square of neighbours. The trend already is that people don't know their neighbours. It'll be a hard thing. As time goes on, people live more disparate and separate lives, and I think that will be a loss to them. So I hope my children aren't affected by it, but I'm sure that their children will be to a certain extent. People's lives will be so separate.
We may have copped on, we may learn to value things beyond money. I hope eventually the economy settles down and we can develop social fabric a little bit more.
That there would be some kind of government policy that would allow children to be brought up by lone parents. I mean, it happens so often at the moment that it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's not being addressed at all.
I ultimately have faith in the human race, yes, definitely. I think goodness is there and all of us eventually, it'll win out. Maybe not, I don't know.
I think populations worldwide have exploded. I mean, that's inevitable. Prosperity will bring that, and healthcare will bring that. I can see this being a tourist attraction in 100 years' time. And if we do bury it in the square, it may be under the helicopter pad because we won't be able to get cars in and out of the city. So we may well be flying in and out in 100 years' time.
I just heard lately it's predictors saying that we'd all have our own individual little flying cars, like our own little airplanes. That sounds kind of interesting.
And I'm sure for the next generation coming up, there'll be new inventions and new things to do, and life does get easier. And even if you compare to, say, our grandparents' day, I mean, their lives were incredibly difficult by comparison to ours now.
And if the pace of change is accelerating at such an extent that in the last 10 years there have been so many changes in Dublin, it would be very naive to picture what it can be in 100 years. But what you would hope is that you still have the same spirit in Dublin and you still have the same atmosphere and the same hospitality. That's what you would hope for. And that it would still be a good place to live. I mean, it's a wonderful city to live in and has been for us.
100 years' time, I think employment will be probably minimal. I think we'll have more than half our lives will be leisure. And the challenge we've all got is making that meaningful leisure.
At the moment, none of us seem to be able to see past this global internet thing. And I can't see beyond it either, but at the moment, for the next 50 years, I can see it very much being dominated by digital technology and that world, definitely. I think pubs in Ireland will definitely still exist, without question. We'll never get rid of pubs in Ireland, ever.
For those of you viewing this in future years, this video, made with assistance from the Millennium Commission, captured a moment in time on September the 3rd in the year 2000. Eaton Square, our home.
1, 2, 3.